Appreciate you being with me. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We are continuing our study of the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15. We've been correlating that with Romans 8, where Paul talks about the messianic sufferings. Paul said, I know that the whole creation groans in birth pangs until now. Those birth pangs are the end time suffering. I've shared with you that in the Jewish narrative, in the Old Testament, and in the New Testament, there is an absolute inseparable connection between the end time tribulation and the resurrection. I tell you what, folks, it is so sad when people fail to see that connection. It's interesting that my dispensational friends see that connection. They just deny the temporal context for the tribulation, i.e. the first century. Now, I shared with you Revelation chapter 11. In Revelation chapter 11, we have what? We have the destruction of the city, quote, where the Lord was slain, unquote. And we have, at that time, the sounding of the seventh trumpet, i.e. the last trumpet, for the resurrection. And thus, judgment on Jerusalem, resurrection are inseparably connected together. But you see, that's not the only place in the book of Revelation where this connection between tribulation and the time of the the judgment on Israel and the resurrection are connected. In Revelation 14, we find the 144,000. Now, who are these? Well, in Revelation chapter 7, they are those who have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. They would be led, we are told, to living waters. Well, that's the resurrection of Revelation 21 and 22. Well, in Revelation 14, we find these 144,000. They are identified for us as those who were the first fruit of those redeemed to God from among man. Oh, wait a minute. The first fruit are the first generation of those redeemed to God. The first Christians, the first Jewish Christians. Oh, wait a minute. According to Revelation chapter 7, they came out of the Great Tribulation. Wow. So, you have the 144,000. They come through the Great Tribulation. They are the first fruit of men redeemed to God. Folks, that demands that the Great Tribulation was in the first century when the first fruit of those redeemed to God took place. There's no escaping that. It is undeniable. Now watch what happens in Revelation chapter 14. In Revelation 14, John sees the 144,000 standing on Mount Zion. And he hears and he sees a great angel flying through the midst of heaven with a loud voice saying, the judgment of Babylon is at hand. The hour of her judgment has come. That angel is preaching to every nation, kindred, tongue, and tribe, saying the judgment of Babylon has arrived. Now wait a minute. This is precisely what we find in Matthew 24. In Matthew 24, what do we have? We have the declaration of the preaching of the gospel into all of the world as a witness to the nations. Then comes the end. Matthew 24:14. Part of that declaration, part of that gospel is what? The impending first generation judgment of Jerusalem, which is the city where the Lord was slain. And you have the time of the gathering, Matthew 24:31, which is the time of the harvest of Revelation 14. And you have Jesus saying in Matthew 24, all of that would take place in that generation. And you have Revelation 14 saying the time of the judgment of Babylon is at hand. What we have then is an absolutely perfect parallel between the Olivet Discourse and the prediction of the preaching of the gospel into all of the world, the time of the Great Tribulation, Matthew 24:21, the time of the gathering, Matthew 24:31, which is the time of the harvest, and it would happen in that generation. In Revelation 14, you have the 144,000. Oh, by the way, in Matthew 24, that first century preaching of the gospel would result in the first fruit. It did result in the first fruit because James 1:18 says, of his own will begat he us by the word of God that we should be a kind of first fruits. Who was he writing to? Oh, the 12 tribes of Israel. James 1. Who are the 144,000? They are remnant of the 12 tribes of Israel. Folks, I'm telling you, this is beautiful symmetry, beautiful harmony, beautiful unity. So when we see in Matthew 24, the preaching of the gospel to produce the first fruits in that generation, the prediction of the tribulation, the prediction of the abomination of desolation, and the great tribulation, and the prediction of the coming of the Lord for the gathering, and we compare that with Revelation 14, we have the 144,000 who are the first fruits, and the voice declares the preaching of the gospel into all of the world. And what comes next? What's the warning? The warning of the judgment of Babylon, the city where the Lord was slain. Oh, and by the way, the time of the harvest. And the harvest is the resurrection. So we see this unbreakable connection between the 144,000, the tribulation, the judgment on Jerusalem, and the harvest. Honestly, I don't know how. I don't know how we'd go about breaking these connections. And all of this means that the resurrection of Romans 8, which was written about that time of suffering and tribulation. This means the resurrection of 1 Corinthians 15, which was written at the time of the suffering, the persecution of the church, which would, of course, lead to the Great Tribulation. And Jesus in Matthew 24 said it would all take place in that generation. So we'll see you on the flip side.